Today's guest is an author, climate activist, and politician. She's a former Maine State House representative and a former senator, and is the youngest female state senator in Maine's history. She's the co-author of Dirt Road Revival: How to Rebuild Rural Politics and Why Our Future Depends Upon It. And she's the co-founder of Dirt Road Organizing, a training organization for people involved in rural politics. And quite frankly, as soon as I discovered who she was and what she was doing, I was so excited to get her on the pod. So Chloe Maxmin, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, Chloe. It's so good to have you. Welcome.
Yeah, and we'll get more into it, friends listening, but I really I saw what Chloe was doing and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's like we're best friends and we don't even know it yet."
That's very kind.
So Chloe, you were a Maine state rep and a senator. And then you decided that you would go from being a candidate and a policymaker to an author and a trainer helping people in rural communities learn how to organize and campaign. What made you make that switch? What was the thing that brought you to decide that that was your purpose?
It's such a good question and one that people ask me all the time. And I try and give my honest answer. When I ran for office in 2018, when I was 25, and I was doing this work up until my early 30s. And honestly, I was really burnt out. I ran in really tricky districts. The process of reelection and where I come from is just as challenging as getting elected in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Maine has a part-time citizen legislature, so I was working multiple jobs to make it all happen, and I was really burned out. I loved the policymaking pieces and feel really proud of the work that I did while I was in office. And I wish it could have just been as simple as, oh, I get to create policy and advocate for policy that represents my community. But I think I also saw how important it is to have leaders that authentically represent their communities, and at the same time to have grassroots movements that can really powerfully show up and shape what policy looks like. Almost all of the bills that I worked on in conjunction with grassroots movements and communities that were impacted by the issues that I was working on. So, I came from an organizing background, and then I got into politics, and then I still feel like organizing is the heart of everything that we need in our democracy. So I had this opportunity to start Dirt Road Organizing and train people and just work with people to kind of build up our collective power across rural America. And it was an opportunity that I jumped at.
That really speaks to me, and the idea that I think the average person, people in politics kind of know these things, but the average person doesn't realize, one, that representatives are almost constantly also trying to get reelected. You have a job interview and you get the job, but then you have to keep interviewing to keep the job. So that's hard. And it's fine. That's how it should be. We don't want it to be a case of where somebody gets in and then they're hard to dislodge because they're not, if they're not doing the job right. But it's hard. And then also the second piece of that, that you were working in conjunction with grassroots organizing groups, like movements, to make bills happen. And that's something I see a lot of, where people are like, I voted for you, just do the thing that I wanted. Yes, you gave them the power to be in that position, but that isn't everything. They need you behind them to show that there's support for whatever issue it is that you care about.
Definitely. Yeah, it was such an interesting, because one of the reasons why I ran for office in the first place, coming from an organizing background, I was like, why do we have these massive marches and all these mobilizations? And it seems like our voices as citizens just fall on the deaf ears of those that we elect. Like, what is going on when people get elected, that it seems like they go into this black hole? Not everyone, I'm being generalistic, but that was really confusing to me. And so when I got elected, I didn't understand why people disappear from representing their constituencies. That I did not understand. But you end up, like in my case, I ended up representing a district that the majority of it was not aligned with like my politics, and I wanted to represent everyone. Even though we weren't aligned, I could see where other people were coming from. I could see like the value and the perspective and what they were trying to accomplish. And so it made representation is so interesting. And I think if we have leaders that are running good campaigns so that they are door knocking, they are listening to their constituents, and then they're creating policy that comes out of those conversations, and they're kind of creating a better relationship between constituents and those we elect. I feel like that little nugget is part of what we need in our democracy right now to restore the faith and the trust. But it's being elected is a lot of work. If you're at the school board level or you're in Congress, I mean, there's a lot of voices coming at you. And part of what we do at Dirt Road is create a really solid sense of community for people who are doing this work. And my own experience, I felt really alone, and it was very isolating. So what we try and do as well is that, like, when you are elected and you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening to me, that you have a community of people that are going through the exact same thing as you. Or even if you run and you don't win, that's also incredibly challenging. So
Yes.
that, I think that sense of community too for people who are doing this work is so important.
You're singing our song, Chloe. That's all of that is what we talk about here on the pod all the time. So thank you for that. I think that one of the things that we talk about sometimes is the idea of loneliness and how like fear festers, right? When you're lonely, especially in the social media age where like the algorithm takes you down dark and scary holes, all the time, and it's just loneliness and fear feeds on loneliness and fear more. But to your point, like community really brings you out of that, right? And allows you to be, especially in rural communities where you're like, and also red communities where you're sort of feeling like I'm the only one aligned with these ideas or these values or whatever. But if you start to find the people that are also in your community that are also aligned with your values, you start to pull out of that fear and pull out of that loneliness, be more courageous, and that's how we build blue power. And so thank you for that. It's really validating to hear that your experiences are aligned with that idea.
Yeah, no, it's a huge part of the work that I do these days is creating community for people. And it's I I I I Heather Cox Richardson is a historian. I bet a lot of people are familiar with her. She's actually from the district that I used to represent. She's from my home county.
Oh, wow.
But I saw a video of her. So this is her idea, not mine. But she was talking about from her historical perspective, when authoritarian regimes rise to power, the consistent source of resistance is community. And I've been thinking about that a lot, especially in the context of the work that I do, but just in this moment in general.
That's so true. That's so true. And well, Jennifer and I got into this podcast stuff and its communication space because we were able to build really strong community in our very historically red and somewhat rural area of Michigan. And so, that kind of message about how do we build a community, and then how does that building of that community lead to, success electorally and, like mutual aid and all of those things that we all want and need as human beings sort of living on Earth. Like we can't live in bubbles. We have to live in community. Well, let's dig in a little bit deeper around just rural organizing. And I'll ask like a broad question. Why do you feel like it's so vital to the future of the country and to democratic politics? With so much of the work seems to be focused on the more like urban populations and the places that are like obviously blue or whatever. You're talking about, no, we also have to like put a lot of emphasis in the rural spaces, and that's where some real power can exist too, if we're able to like develop it in the right ways. I'd love to hear more about like your thinking around that and what you're kind of seeing in the grassroots on the ground spaces.
Definitely. And just for my disclaimer, since I talk about Dirt Road, we're a nonpartisan organization, but we identify with progressive values, and so I use the word progressive.
100%.
What part of our mission statement at Dirt Road is the path to a just and equitable democracy runs straight through rural America. And it's founded in this idea that we cannot build progressive power that wins durable policy solutions without organizing in rural spaces. It's on some levels, it's a basic math problem of how our democracy is set up, both at the federal level and at the state level. And on the other hand, it's about creating a democratic system that is representative of all of the experiences on a particular issue. So, for example, progressive solutions around healthcare are going to look very different in an urban context than they do in a suburban or a rural context.
So much.
But so often we just hear kind of that the solutions that work in urban areas, and so it just ends up accidentally, sometimes intentionally, but I think mostly accidentally, alienating so many people that are aligned with our values but are not agreeing with our policies. And so the idea of organizing in a grassroots, authentic way in rural spaces is about building progressive power for good policy, for the long haul and not a cycle or two. There's tons of good math behind it that is not always in the front of my brain, but it's all in the book, and it's laid out much clearer in the book than I could ever regurgitate right now.
Yeah, and I advise everybody who's interested in this sort of thing to take a look and read Dirt Road Revival. I'm just delving in. I haven't had time to finish the whole thing, but I'm loving it. Your policy is to train people, like we you just talked about how you're a nonpartisan organization. You're not specifically here for a democratic alignment, but you do have progressive values, and they are listed out on the Dirt Road Organizing website for everyone to see. And you have stated that you're not restricted by party. Like, you welcome anybody from any party or non-party that is interested in this training, as long as they align with your values. So what are you seeing in rural communities that makes you believe that focusing on values and not partisanship is more useful than the other way around?
I think my mind comes up with two pieces to that answer. The first is that I think in general, people are really tired of partisanship and the deep divides that are erupting all over the country right now. I think we're either tired of the divides or we're very actively participating in creating violent divides. So trying to create space where we can listen to each other, find common ground, and be able to do that organizing work in rural spaces, which are not all conservative, but are mostly conservative. I always say that I feel like that bridge building work is a really specific theory of change that I think is part of the broader progressive ecosystem, but isn't everyone's theory of change. My work and the work that we train on is supporting folks to go have challenging conversations with people of different political persuasions, but that's not the work for everyone, and that is always okay. I think the other part of that, kind of what I was talking about before, which is that the history of the progressive movement is very urban. There are, of course, like really powerful rural stories in the progressive movement, but I think the policies that have come out and that have really shaped what people think of as progressive are pretty urban. I use healthcare as an example a lot because, like where I live, it's not just about having affordable healthcare, but it's also about accessibility with rural hospital closures. They're talking about closing the labor and delivery center in my home county. And so, just like there's also a whole different component to it that is not often reflected in a more urban context. And I think it's hard. There's so much good research around this. There's like amazing books around how rural communities are moral communities. That comes from a book by Robert Wethnow called The Left Behind. The rural communities have a different culture that isn't necessarily centered around the policy, like Medicaid for all or universal health care. We're talking about it in more of a values context. There's another great book, The Politics of Resentment, that also delves into this theme from a Midwestern perspective. All to say that it's just a different culture. So if we're bringing in like urban language and urban policy solutions, then it's just not going to land. I think policies are also, they often are attached with like specific context, specific lobbyists, specific interests. And I've in my own experience, I found it really hard to have good, productive conversations around policies if you don't already know what values you have in common with somebody.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like, kind of harkening back to something you said earlier, but also on this topic, I look at, we talk to a lot of different organizers in our community at different levels, different races, in terms of like Congress, state Senate, state House, et cetera, the Michigan Democratic Party. And not always, but I often come away feeling like they see, so we have 3 cities that are, a major part of our districts, 4 if you count our congressional district. And they're often talking about how to maximize their votes in the 2 or 3 largest urban cities. And often that's Black votes, which I think are extremely important. And I would love for them to really, because it's a very low turnout rate, and I would love for them to improve that. But what I always take away from that conversation is often, you've already hit your ceiling. Midland's done what they can. You got the city. You're never going to get the county. That's rule. Why would we even go out there? And they don't say that exactly. But I often come away from the conversation feeling that way. Like, I know it's hard to organize in rural areas. There's, the houses are further apart. The driveways are long. It's not as easy to door knock. You can't get as much done in the time that you have. And sometimes the people you talk to are a little bit on the hostile side. But we're never going to create a durable, lasting, political structure, regardless of party, if we don't start talking to people in those rural communities and talking to them in a way that reaches them, and that's not always exactly the same as you would do in an urban setting.
Definitely. I think, I guess, first of all, I always have so many disclaimers that I say when I talk about this work, because I feel like it's really complicated and there's lots of stuff to unpack when you're talking about rural organizing. But, even though I'm clearly advocating, we're all clearly advocating for rural organizing. That is not to take away from organizing other underrepresented constituencies,
absolutely,
non-rural areas. There's enough money in this country to make it all happen. It's just profoundly misplaced. And I think that scenario that you just laid out is so common. I mean, I've experienced it. My co-director Kane has experienced it. Almost every candidate that we work with has experienced it. With some people being told directly, like, we just don't have the resources to invest in your district this year. And I think it's, I think there's a bunch of things happening there. I think there's the historical context. I'm taking off my dirt road hat for a second. The historical context of the Democratic Party is very much isolating and just drilling down into our urban centers, because that's where our base is. And we need those people to vote, no doubt. It's also way more bang for your buck because, like you're saying, people are more densely populated. So you can get, way more views per ad, way more votes per voter registration drive, or whatever you're doing. It's a more efficient use of your money. But what we've seen clearly over the decades is that the Democrats have lost a significant amount of power in rural places. Like when I was in high school, the partisan gap with rural voters was dead even. And now rural voters lean to the right by over 25 points. And that is largely because of the consolidation of Democratic power in urban spaces. And so I think obviously what you're saying is so right on that.
Yes.
That's just not a sustainable way to build a party, to build a movement that is fighting for the basic human rights of people in this country. And so something's got to give. But I think a lot of people in the party are overworked and underpaid and are just trying to do their best with the resources that they have.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the folks that we work with are they're in challenging districts. And so, wherever you go, there's a calculus that has to be made. And that's a little bit of what we try and do at Dirt Road is like commit to some of those really hard races. And, we have someone running in Georgia. They're making it the first competitive ballot in 18 years. Like those are the places where I find a lot of hope, that's a huge shift for that community.
Yeah. And so kind of doubling down on those challenges, I'm curious about what advice you would give to somebody who's like organizing or getting started organizing in rural areas. I know that the concept of deep canvassing kind of comes into that. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, what that is like, how to use that, but also if there's any other advice or thoughts that you can give folks who are kind of trying to make that shift to, especially in a place like where we live, where we've got an urban center, but we have very rural areas all around us, right? And so like, how do you like navigate and balance the resources, which I agree are not as limited as we'd like to think they are, and to be able to do both, like walk and chew gum at the same time, speak to urban voters, speak to rural voters, get out there and, have those conversations that are necessary to shape hearts and minds.
Yeah. Deep canvassing, I had actually never heard that term when I started canvassing myself in my own rural district. And I'd been taught to canvass kind of the traditional way of like the 30-second conversation, just gauge if the voter is supporting the candidate and move on. And I hated it. I felt disgusting doing it, and I could tell the voter hated it.
Yep.
And so when I started canvassing for myself, I mean, it was immediately apparent, like it's just obvious, like human engagement, that you cannot have a 5-second conversation with someone who has an R next to their name when you have a D next to the name and expect like anything positive to happen there. Mm-hmm. And so those conversations were taking, 15, 20, sometimes even 30 minutes. And they were like incredible conversations that changed my life, changed my perspective on politics, and shaped my work to this day. So I call my style canvassing dirt road canvassing because it's far less polished than deep canvassing. But deep canvassing has like an incredibly rich history rooted in the trans rights movement. Mm-hmm. And, there's groups like People's Action that have proven how effective it is, like with data and numbers. I think deep canvassing is the way to go, but it's very challenging and it takes a ton of time. But it is something that we include in our dirt road organizing cohorts. So I, just a plug for our organization, but we train folks to run for office. We have a cohort for candidates, people who want to run. We also have a cohort for organizers and people who are working on campaigns. The cohorts are small, so we can help people build community, but we bring in almost 24 trainers from across the country to help people build up those hard skills from a rural context. We have dedicated one-on-one support from our staff to help people create their campaign plans or their organizing plans. We really try and walk people through the basics of like, this is what it means to do this work in a rural context. And these are people who have done it, and just create a lot of customized support around people who are ready to dive in. And I always, for folks who are living in an urban context, I think supporting your, Elsie, goodness, the dog is barking at my partner. I don't know why. For people in an urban context, you got to support your awesome local candidates who are running and trying to make things different. And if everything is like safe and where you want it to be, then look outside and do some research on the people running in the challenging districts around you and go help someone that deserves to win.
Yeah, go all in there.
I love that. Like, I guess, I mean, I'm trying to think if I've ever thought of that, like talking to people in the urban areas where you've got secure districts. Why not come out to our rural districts? Learn how to canvass with rural areas and what things they care about, and how to talk to people. And honestly, we have a lot of, we've developed canvassing here in Midland, and it's really just been organic. It's not like we or anybody else taught anybody exactly how to do this. It was just with Sarah ran a number of years ago, and I'm sure she probably did some training with different volunteers. But I've also seen like they just go out and talk to people. It's not about hi, I'm here for so and so, and they're running for such and such, and we could really use your support. They might say who they're there for, but they always start a conversation. And those are honestly the absolute best volunteers that really, like, they might not get as many doors done in an hour as somebody else just doing the spiel, but they have so many more meaningful conversations, and they write down like, okay, this person, I think we can flip them. Let's go back to them. Or they're really excited about what we're talking about. They might volunteer. So you get so much more out of those conversations than just I'll vote, or no, I don't plan on it, or whatever, I'll think about it.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, like I was saying, the some of the conversations that I've had doing this work have totally changed my life and challenged my own judgments and prejudices that I've had around our country and my own
Yeah.
community. And I value that so much, and it takes more time. That's another reason why it's harder to invest in this work, because, instead of, I have friends who would run for office in an urban space and they would knock like 200 doors a day, easy. And when I was running, it would take me I would have to literally go out for an entire day to knock 100 doors.
Yeah.
It's just it's a really different thing, but those relationships have to be built. I mean, there's I don't see any other way around it. I think it's a very slow and intentional path back to where we want to be, and it's going to take a really, really, really long time. But those relationships have been broken, trust has been broken. And you can't just, I always think of it as just like making a new friend. You can't just make a new friend and be like, hey, what do you think about abortion? You're never, that's like never the way to start a friendship. You ask them, like, do they have a garden this year? What TV are you watching? You start from like a more basic place. And I think the same thing applies to this work.
Yep. I everything you're saying, like when I was running for Michigan State House in 2018, I used to get, and I didn't even know deep canvassing was a thing. I've since learned about it, but I used to get a lot of feedback that I was spending too much time on these doors all the time. And I was like, I need to have these conversations, because it's like, it's not just about like hearing from them and getting them to vote for me. It's understanding their lives and lived experiences to help shape my perspective on the world, because that's the job of a representative, is to be able to understand, the person who's living in a trailer park who has a tree growing through their living room, like that, and I'm literally on their porch talking with them about the things that they're worried about when they put their head on their pillow at night. And if I had not had that conversation, then I wouldn't understand how that person is living and what they're worried about, and how things can help them. We've talked a lot about transactional versus transformational relationship building. The transactional relationship building is that 30-second, like, hey, I'm this person, here's my literature, are you going to vote for me? I'm going to mark yes or no on my little app here, and then keep going so I can hit as many doors as possible. Versus really like staying, maybe not getting the result that you want today, coming back and having more conversations, seeing them at the the county fair, on the walking down the boardwalk at the county fair, and being like, I saw you back at your door and we talked about this, how's that going? And building those like relationships in a deep way, that regardless of party and all of that crap that's going on, that can really like shift and make movements happen. And
Definitely.
it's a way of doing it that's very different than the transactional space. We also talk about transactional versus transformational when it comes to fundraising, right? Like, I'm going to sit and call 100 people and ask them all for $50 checks, or I'm going to develop a relationship with somebody where they're going to eventually write me, a check to max out, because they know who I am and they're not just like supporting me, they're joining a movement with me together.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
All right. Well, we usually, I know we're coming up on time for what we had planned for, and we usually end with a bit of an icebreaker, sort of lighter, get to know us question. So if you're able to stick around for that, I've got one for us. Okay.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay. So, Chloe, you're outside right now. You're calling in and joining us from outside. Jennifer and I were talking. We were having a conversation. I think this was yesterday, about like when we were kids and we would be outside. Jennifer shared that she has a very vivid memory of pulling up grass and eating the roots of the grass.
The tender white little things, they're so yummy.
And I joked with her that's where her grassroots like sentimentalities came from. I have a memory of being in the backyard and imagining that I was like, my backyard was a desert island, and what would I do if I had to like live here forever? And I went around my backyard trying to eat everything to see if I could survive on it. And by the way, lilac leaves are disgusting. So I guess my question is, like harken back to when you were a kid and it was summertime and you probably spent some time outside. Who were you then? Like, what were you doing when you were a child? How were you spending your summer days outside? And how does that connect to who you are today?
Mm. Yeah, I had a really beautiful, blessed childhood. I grew up on a farm in rural Maine on a lake. And so I was either
Oh,
helping my dad on the farm or in the lake with my brother. And yeah, I mean, I'm the same way now. I just am always outside, even in the wintertime. I hate being indoors.
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Jennifer, who are you? What was a day like for you? How did you spend your time?
So I grew up on 40 acres out in Hope, Michigan, very rural farming country. We didn't have a farm. Well, we had a garden, but it was part woods and part meadow. And like my brother and sisters and I just spent all the time outside. We were in the woods building forts, digging foxholes. We had a sand pit where we would take our Star Wars characters and they were on Tatooine. And like we had everything we could imagine. We were just the most imaginative. We would ride our bikes around and pretend they were cars. And our dog's pen was the post office. Why? I don't know. But somebody always got to go in there and be the postman. Um, but yeah,
That's
just
awesome.
in a lot of winter too, we'd take a hose out and flood part of the field so that we could have ice skating and just, which is weird because I am so not an outdoorsy person now. But as a kid, yeah, go outside, kids, and that was fine. That's what we did.
That's amazing.
So I'll round us off by sharing that I grew up in Flint, Michigan, so very urban setting, but I was very fortunate, like a lot of Michigan folks, and I'm sure folks in Maine too, to have a lake that you go to. Most people in Michigan, if you ask like, what was your lake growing up? Not that you owned a lake, but like the lake you
Hmm.
went to. Either you knew somebody who had a cabin, or there's a campground that you visited every summer or whatever. And my grandparents had a little cabin that they built on a lake in Michigan. And there was a couple of weeks every summer where all the cousins, it was like grandma and grandpa camp, all of their grandkids would stay for a couple of weeks. I can't imagine. My parents must have just loved the hell out of those 2 weeks. But like, all the grandkids would come. We would just stay in the cabin and spend our days on these rowboats, going out and catching turtles and releasing them, and catching frogs and releasing them. I know to this day how to catch a turtle, like how to see its little head sticking out between the lily pads, and row over to them as silently as possible and swipe them down and take a look at them with your hands. So idyllic little space for us every summer. And it's that property still in my family, and it's sacred ground for us. So
That's amazing.
yeah. Well, I'm so grateful that we all had some amazing childhood outdoor experiences. Awesome. So, Chloe, thanks so much for joining our pod today. I'm wondering if you have a website or something that we can direct our listeners to go to find out more information about your work.
Yes, dirtroadorganizing.org.
So,
Pretty simple.
awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so
And
much
quick
for
question
joining.
while we're still on it.
Oh, good.
So you've already done the 2026 cohort. Are you taking applications for the 2027 already, or when does that start?
Yes, if you go on the website, you can sign up to receive the application for 2027. We're in the process of finalizing those dates, but if you sign up, you'll definitely get the information from us.
And that's for anybody that's looking to organize, be a candidate, be a staffer, work on a campaign. It's not limited to just candidates.
Exactly. Yes, and there's a pretty thorough FAQ on the website too that helps you kind of sift through if you're a good fit for our program. And also, if you fill out the contact form on the website, it goes to my email inbox, and I always love talking to people about the program and if it's a good fit for them.
Awesome.
That's so awesome. Chloe, you're doing amazing work. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thanks for joining the pod. Everyone listening, definitely go out and go to Chloe's website and the book and just find out more about Dirt Road Organizing, which is like the best name ever. So congratulations on that too. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in once again. We're the Beyond Resistance Pod, where we share hard-won insights to build blue power in red communities and start winning. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. You can listen to the Beyond Resistance podcast on all major platforms. Leave us a review to boost this episode and help us reach more blue dots and red seas. Follow us on social media and like, share, comment to increase our reach. Subscribe to our Patreon and gain access to our private Discord channel and make monetary donations of support through Venmo. You can find all of this and more at beyondresistancepod.com. Beyond Resistance is a Beyond Resistance LLC production. Producers Jennifer Austin and Sarah Schultz. Editing Jennifer Austin. Theme song We Run the Room by Shadow Kitten.